Welcome back to the channel. Today I have a few things I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about what information is relevant for picking cabinet officials, what should be in the public discussion, what shouldn't be. How does this relate to the Department of Defense, HHS Secretary, FDA, NIH? Let's get into that. I also want to talk about a story that Politico has put out saying that Biden might pardon Anthony Fauci on his way out the door. My guess is for the crime of perjury. Fauci testified that we didn't fund gain-of-function research when we did fund gain-of-function research, and his own emails contradict that. That's a knowing lie. And I also want to talk a little bit about, if time permits, United Healthcare and the tragedy that has emerged there, and my condolences go to the family of the assassinated CEO. So let's get started. Picking cabinet officials. So I have an essay out in Vinay Prasad's Observations and Thoughts, and this is my plug at the start of the show. You need to subscribe to me at drvinayprasad.com. It's the only place where you and I are in direct communication because you give me your email and I can export that list. That's not true on any other platform. That's not true on X, and that's not true on YouTube. These are all intermediary platforms where if they ever wanted to, they could sever this tie completely. And that gives them too much power, particularly since many of these platforms have misused that censorship power. So subscribe at drvinayprasad.com. Now, the story I wrote is called How to Judge Federal Nominees, stories about bears, sex scandals, conflict of interest, and what about their actual views? What is relevant? It's a 7-point nonpartisan guide. And I really think it's nonpartisan. It's not trying to pick favorites. It's a guide that we can apply to people in both political parties whenever they're nominees. I just happen to be writing it now because there's a lot more stories in the news. So the first thing I want to say is that many years ago, Tom Daschle was up for HHS Secretary, and Daschle famously did not pay all his income tax. I think the specific crime was he paid a nanny, in part, in cash. Oh no, somebody in America is paying a nanny in cash? Oh, that's a very unusual thing, isn't it? We should throw the book at that person. Okay, I'm joking. Of course, everyone does that. Okay, it's incredibly common to evade taxes, sure. That to me is a very, very minor offense, and I don't think somebody should be thrown out over that. It also, at last I checked, has nothing to do with anything HHS does, okay? But this happened a while back. And then you all remember Al Franken was famously thrown out for a photograph. That was when he was a comedian, and some related stories that were really sort of difficult to substantiate, and I thought he was forced out unfairly. Go back in time. In the 1960s, the media did not discuss the personal lives of politicians. All those JFK scandals that we've learned about, that didn't get discussed in the media in the 1960s. There was an implicit code that we wouldn't talk about that. Fast forward to today. Now we learn about all sorts of things. We learn that Doug Emhoff, the vice president's husband, supposedly slapped a woman so hard she spun around. We learned that Pete Hegseth has allegations against him, and his letter that his mother sent him is being discussed. Okay, so what is my rule of thumb for how to separate what we should be considering and what we shouldn't be considering? And along the way, what about these people's actual views on any of the job description? Okay, let's talk about what they actually want to do. So here's my 7-point plan for how to separate these things. Number 1, this is the most important thing. You got to remember, one side won and one side lost. There was a victor and there was a loser. And what that means is the victor will get to choose who is the nominee. And they also have the Senate, so they're probably going to get to pick who they want in. And I really get annoyed when I hear people say, well, I like RFK's position on children nutrition. I like it on pesticides. I like it on artificial dyes. I like his position on maybe even fluoride in the water or lowering restrictions on raw milk. I think that people should have that body autonomy. I like his position against vaccine mandates, but I don't like some of his other positions or other past statements. Sure, I can sympathize with that. That's where you find me. I'm happy to call balls and strikes for all his positions. But don't tell me, they say this. They say, why can't we get someone who's got all those things I like, but not those things I don't like? Well, that's not going to happen. It's not going to be RFK Jr., and if he doesn't get the nominee, we're going to go right to Jesus Christ. We're going to pick up Jesus and say, Jesus, now you're in, because you were number 2. RFK Jr., then Jesus. No, it's not going to be a perfect person, okay? It's not going to be a perfect person. It's going to be, you have to think, if we don't get Marty, if we don't get RFK, if we don't get Jay, and by the way, I've endorsed both Marty and Jay. I think they're great picks. If we don't get these people, and you can see my prior videos on that, if we don't get these people, we are going to get, and then tell me who you think should be nominated. I see so many people in the mainstream media criticizing these picks. Who do you want to be nominated? And be realistic, because if it's not this guy, who's it going to be? Give me a realistic proposition. It's going to be somebody from the party you dislike. So tell me who it's going to be. And if you can't tell me who you think it should be, it's kind of a really, you just want to sabotage somebody, but you don't actually have a different person you think can get the job. And that to me is the first problem with this whole debate. Number two, is there a crime involved? If there's a crime involved, I think it should be investigated by the police and we should kind of stay out of it. It shouldn't be litigated in the court of public opinion. Number three, is there job-related hypocrisy involved? I draw a distinction between job-related hypocrisy and personal hypocrisy. Job-related hypocrisy is when Jay Varma, who is the advisor to de Blasio in New York City during the coronavirus pandemic, sets restrictions while he was having sex parties, and going to raves in violation of those restrictions. That's a job-related hypocrisy. You were saying we should do this, and you yourself could not abide by it, suggesting you thought it was either useless or people couldn't abide by that, or you thought the trade-off was different for you. That's job-related hypocrisy. People hate job-related hypocrisy. I think that's really the worst kind of leader. It's the most disqualifying. In my piece, I say it would be like if Fauci actually believed it was a lab leak, but he said otherwise. It's a job-related hypocrisy. I think some people say that RFK Jr. in that picture where he holds a McDonald's burger looking uneasy about eating it is engaging in hypocrisy because he champions better nutrition. But that to me is different. That's personal. If everyone knows that we can have better nutrition in society, but every once in a while, everybody's going to cheat and have a cheeseburger. That's different than job-related hypocrisy, setting rules for other people. Okay. And I also think that if somebody is a Christian and they are found to not do things in accordance with Christian doctrine, that's a personal hypocrisy. But somebody else put it nicely to me in one of my comments, and they said that no one in Christianity is expected to be perfect except Jesus. Nobody's expected to be perfect. So I think we should be more tolerant of that kind of stuff. My next point, is everyone investigated equally? Okay. Is everyone investigated equally? Now, what I mean by that is that we have to be very careful that if we're going to start airing people's dirty laundry, that we are looking equally at all people. People who happen to be divorced and going through a rancorous divorce are going to have more negative things in the public eye. Some people have emails from their mother that have been leaked to their ex-wife, who may have leaked it to someone else. I don't even know how that email came out. But we're not looking at everyone's personal communication with their mother. And that to me is profoundly unfair if you start looking much more at some people than other people. If you want to look at everyone equally, what I suspect you'll find is that all of these things that get labeled as scandals, sex, affairs, abortions, drugs, partying, confrontation, fighting, bad tempers, drinking, all these things are very common. They're very common among people, probably particularly among the types of people that aspire for these roles. And I think we would all be better off if we left some of that at the door and didn't engage in all that kind of stuff. I say not everyone kept diaries and then had those leaked after a former spouse committed suicide and threatened to leak those diaries when they committed suicide, and then they did. Like, that's a level of intrusiveness that's not equal for everyone, and that to me strikes me as unfair. Number 5. What about how did they do their job? I don't see anybody in any of these posts talking about how did somebody actually do their job. I saw one post saying that Pete Hegseth would sometimes go on Fox and Friends or a TV show while he had been drinking a lot. And they say, well, that's bad to drink on the job. But, if you're a surgeon and you drink on the job, I think it's terrible. In part, it's hard to know if that affected you. I mean, we can assume the worst. No one's in the OR watching what you're doing. The scrub tech may have whoa, what's going on with this person? But there's no video of what you did in the OR. Maybe we should videotape operations, by the way. I think people don't want that for medical legal purposes. But if you really are confident in your work, you can let somebody videotape it. Anyway, Pete Hegseth is different. He's on TV. Instead of telling me he was drinking, show me a video clip of him acting drunk. I mean, you have a complete transcript, you have a complete documentation of what his work product was. Show me him doing a bad job as an anchor. And that to me is more compelling than you just talking about what he might have been doing and if it affected him. And how is it also, to me, different than somebody taking a Klonopin and going on TV? That's something I struggle with. People take Klonopin, that's a prescription drug for anxiety, and some people take a shot. To me personally, when I give talks, I don't take anything. I mean, maybe I'll have a cup of coffee in the morning, but I like a talk where you have nothing clouding your mind. But musicians and other performers are different. And I think, to me, judge it based on the work product. Okay, what are their views? And big note of caution, what about people with no range of views? We're not talking enough about what are their actual views. You can fault RFK Jr. for many of his views, and I have in many of my pieces on him, but you can also give credit for his views that are right. But what are the views of Alex Azar? What are the views of Javier Becerra? Can somebody tell me 20 of Javier Becerra's views? You don't even know the name Javier Becerra. So these candidates who just like live this life where they don't ever say what they think about anything, they just glide through these nominations. That's not the incentive we want to have. People who don't have opinions, who stay quiet, who engage in groupthink, who just kiss the right rings along the way. That's really not what we want. And I say that might be what you want if you want status quo, but that's not what you want. That's not what you want if you want profound change. And when it comes to healthcare, people want profound change. The premiums are drowning us. Wages are stagnant. The quality of care we get is terrible. Doctors are unhappy. Patients are unhappy. Nobody is happy with American healthcare. And so they want dramatic change. That means they want someone to go in there and shake things up. Even if they get 7 things right and 3 things wrong, they're okay with that. That's what they voted for, okay? So to me, to pick somebody, a career bureaucrat who's not going to do anything, that's not what people voted for. It's just going to build more resentment. And that to me is a problem. So why don't we talk about that? And then finally, my 7th point, what checks and balances exist? Are there other forces that will put a check on the mistaken policy? And here, this is what I come to RFK Jr. when people say, oh, he's going to ban MMR vaccines, which I think would be a ludicrous thing to do. To me, the check is he won't do that because he can't, because he's got the media against him. He's got lots of people in Congress against that. He's got so many checks and balances on that. To me, what's much more dangerous is when you get somebody like a Walensky come in there and she says, I'm going to mandate COVID boosters in everybody and use the power of the federal government to force people and fire people. And then the media completely goes lockstep with that and everyone's on the same team. When you're Team Democrat, you got the media on your side, you've got the mainstream media, you got all this stuff. There's no check and balance on Team Democrat. Team Republican, they have every check and balance. When Trump says open schools, they look into everything. In fact, if Trump had merely said, kids shouldn't go to school until we know it's safe. And if Trump said, I think that everyone should wear the mask, and guess what? I'm going to wear the mask every day. Then the entire last few years would have been different. Fauci would have said masks don't work, and everyone said, well, we need randomized controlled trials before giving vaccines to kids, and schools should be open. The Europeans are opening it. It's literally people who are so bad at thinking about policy, they're just anchoring to this person they dislike. And that to me is why checks and balances is something important. That to me is something that you run the risk. So in the case of Trump, they overchecked him. It was too much of the problem. But he certainly, Okay, I'll move to my next point. I feel like I've made those points. Pardoning Anthony Fauci. To me, and I kind of lost my train of thought there, so I'm just going to put that in there, whatever. It happens rarely to me, but it does happen. Okay, so you got proof of it happening. So Anthony Fauci, pardoning him. The Biden administration has just pardoned Hunter Biden for 11 years of his activities. They're talking about preemptively pardoning Anthony Fauci. This has been reported by Politico. To me, it's going to set a very bad precedent, and I want to read you a quote that somebody put online that I thought was really well put. It said, a good reminder that the reason justice exists is not just to punish misdeeds, depravity, and violence, but to prevent them. That's the entire purpose of the government, an arbiter and enforcer of justice, something every good and sane person wants. And what I mean by that is, if somebody perjured themselves in front of Congress, which I think is what he did, he testified repeatedly that the NIAID did not fund gain-of-function research, and of course, his own email suggests that he knowingly funded gain-of-function research. His crime will not be these things we disagree with him on policy matters. We're fine to disagree with him on masking kids and these things. His crime is perjury, which is a crime. And if you pardon him for perjury, I think it's extremely bad. It means that a future scientist should perjure themselves and gain the favor of a politician and align themselves with one political party. You see, the only party that's going to pardon him is the Democrats, because he routinely did things to signal, I think, that he is a Democrat and supports Democrats. And they're the ones he has done a very nice political job of getting on their side. A future person will try to create loyalty with any politician in the hopes of a pardon that they can get away with anything. And I think it's an extremely bad precedent. We need scientists to be neutral arbiters, and so they should be able to be prosecuted if they, in fact, perjured themselves. Richard Ebright, a Georgia professor, writes, Fauci provably violated federal policies on gain-of-function and enhanced potential pandemic pathogen research. provably committed conspiracy to defraud and perjury, and probably is culpable for a pandemic that killed 20 million and cost 25 trillion. That's Richard Ebright's opinion. I think that's the question that should be, in fact, litigated. And so he should not be pardoned. He should be open to that. And that pardon is not just about him. He's an old man. I'm not very interested in punishing him. The pardon is as a disincentive to all future people who hold these positions so that they don't lie. And also to set the record straight on what actually happened, which I think is something in the American interest. Okay, so those are my thoughts on that. My closing thought. I think the United Healthcare CEO being assassinated in the video of that is extremely tragic, and this is a man who has a family and kids, and so I think that the first thing to say is that's an extremely tragic video. The New York Times is reporting that there are many people who are gleeful about this, and I even saw somebody retweet an old video of Glaucomflecken where he was criticizing United Healthcare profits, like on the day of the assassination, and when I saw somebody retweet that, I thought that was in really poor taste. I think there's a misunderstanding of healthcare. I mean, I think people are frustrated. They want RFK to go in there and shake the whole thing up. But the misunderstanding of healthcare is that the only broken part is insurance. The whole system is broken. The pharmaceutical manufacturers are collecting massive profit margins. They're getting like profit margins that rival oil and natural gas. They've lobbied the FDA to have a low and permissive standard so they can slip through many, many ineffective products and bleed the American public. The FDA, they're not doing a good job. They were revolving door politics is sickening. Scott Gottlieb is commissioner. Then he's working for Pfizer and he's trying to push vaccine passports. And now he's probably aspiring to be an HHS again. This kind of revolving door politics is disgusting. The regulatory systems are profoundly broken. You've got these guideline committees like NCCN recommending products that have no credible evidence and forcing people like CMS to pay for that. And you've got a whole bureaucracy that is doing nothing but creating profits. And you've got the insurance companies, and they do engage in a lot of bad behavior. And we all know, any of us who sat on the phone with those stupid peer-to-peers, that they're wasting our time and they're denying claims that they shouldn't deny. But they're also denying claims that they should deny, as I talked about in a prior video of somebody in Vanderbilt wants to do a double lung transplant on someone with metastatic lung cancer and other preposterous, extremely costly, unproven, sort of just Hail Mary medicine, the surgical equivalent of giving someone ivermectin, surgical equivalent of these things that they criticize. They also deny some of these claims too, and they have a different incentive. They have a medical loss ratio set there, which means they can only take a portion of their entire revenue as profit, and the rest has to be spent out. Now imagine we go to eat pizza, and I tell you, you're really hungry. You can only eat 20% of the pizza I order. What size should I order? Small, medium, or extra large? You're going to say extra large because your 20% is bigger. Now think about that incentive. What happens is, in the long haul, the insurance company's goal is to grow healthcare spending. Now they don't want to go there all at once, and that's why they do some of these things to buffer year-to-year variability, but they want to grow healthcare spending. They want us to spend more on more tests and more procedures. They just want all their competitors to do it together so that we can spend, instead of 20%, 30%, or 40%, or 50% of GDP on healthcare. And that's when we will fall as a civilization. Rome famously fell when half of the days in the Roman capital were holidays, and I suspect the U.S. may no longer be solvent if 50% of all our spending is on healthcare. So this is such a broken thing, completely broken, and you get people inserting themselves into this, saying that, well, the problem is United denying, like Glaucomflecken does, and the problem is this or that, and they're stoking a lot of passions. But if you really want to analyze this, you got to look at the whole picture, and every single person in this system needs the squeeze. The companies need the squeeze, the insurers need the squeeze, everybody needs the squeeze. But picking one person and demonizing them is reckless, in my opinion, and it will get someone killed, and it might have in this case. We don't know everything, but we know the casings on the bullets said things like denial and things that obviously, and many people in the public are gleeful about it, and I think that's extremely problematic, and it's a misunderstanding of how profoundly broken. And to connect it to my first point, it speaks to the fact that people do want this system to change, and to really fix a system, you have to understand how it's broken. You can't just come and make some comedy video not knowing the whole system and how it all works and how the pieces go together. It requires years of health policy study and, typically publishing some peer-reviewed articles on the topic and things like this, which a lot of people don't want to do that hard work. And I get it. They're frustrated. They're angry. They don't like peers. Neither do I. I hate them. I think they're a waste of my time. But that's not an excuse, in my opinion. So those are my thoughts. All right. I did this little video. I covered all the things on my talking point list. I'm going to be doing a great session with Aaron Goodman in ASH. I'll put that clip in. What should you do? Subscribe to drvinayprasad.com. You can subscribe for free so that we're connected. You can also become a paid subscriber because that's what keeps this thing going. Go to sensiblemedicine.com. I have an article out there this week on a bill that might make DEI illegal in medical schools. It's a very interesting bill, and it's a very interesting article, I hope, because I talk about the tension between, although I'm very sympathetic to a lot of what's in that bill, I'm not sure how you legislate ideas in a medical school, especially when those ideas are so hard to define and put your hands around completely. And follow me on Instagram, follow me on X, and I'll be back hopefully with more VPZD next week. Until next time.